We have a speaker who is both British and Mexican, and who spent 12 years in Mexico City and has written a book, which you'll see on the tables outside, on the narco wars. It's a subject of no small interest to journalists, since so many journalists have been killed in that astonishing collection of barbaric crimes that seem to be the punishment for people in that circumstance. But Ioan Grillo has written this book, and I think he'll tell you a bit about it. But I'd welcome you all to answer some questions and ask questions at the end, which we will have a good time for Q&A. But now towards that, not waste any more of your time, Ioan Grillo.
Okay, thanks much, Gavin, for the introduction. Call me Mexican and English. It's nice. I still consider myself 100% British, or 100% English rather than Mexican, but I have lived there for 12 years and dearly love the country. I haven't spent much time in the UK since the kind of mid to late 90s, so coming back often I feel a bit disorientated, like I've been asleep for 20 years. I'm still like looking for payphones and things like that, trying to find my way around, a bit lost. I still remember this area at Angel, and it was a lot rougher and dirtier than it is now. Seems to look a lot nicer. But anyway, so we're talking about Mexico. Do you want to raise your hand if you have been to Mexico? Okay, that's quite an impressive amount. And who here has been to anywhere in Latin America? That's a good crowd. And who here has taken illegal drugs from Latin America? Don't worry, you don't have to raise your hands. I didn't see anyone raise their hands. I'm sure somebody was lying. But I mean, I joke, but it is, seriously part of the issue, this connection we have between countries which use illegal drugs in large quantities, like the UK, which has a very high consumption of cocaine, and Spain and Italy, and the United States, of course, and countries which produce and traffic drugs, like Mexico, like Colombia, where I've been doing a lot of this work. And this connection is so important, and it's very hard to find solutions when you have different governments involved with different priorities. So I'm here, like I said, just a quick introduction. I've been in Mexico for 12 years. I've worked for a whole variety of media outlets, and found myself here as an expert on Mexican drug cartels. And I think, like anything, most people get into covering an issue in depth and specializing in an issue by accident to an extent. I never went and planned, I'm going to go to Mexico for 12 years and do this and plan this, but one thing happens and then it kind of leads on to more and builds up momentum. I think it's probably what many people find specializing in a certain issue. You might go into an issue and then just covering some stories, going to a certain place, and gradually you build up more knowledge of that issue and become a real authority on that. So I first went to Mexico in the year 2000, and I flew over there and got a job at a local English language newspaper called The News. And again, I recommend anyone who wants to work outside of the UK, around the world, don't wait for the BBC, 20 years necessarily working at the BBC for them to send you, or a newspaper. It's great getting experience here, but often the best way is just simply to get on a plane and to get out there and to get in to start to see what you can find in the field. So I was working at this newspaper called The News, a very poorly paid paper with like coffee-stained computers, and we were given terrible money. But it was a great way to get in there, and I started covering right away the issues of crime and drugs and so forth, and going to court martials of generals and press conferences with the president and Kofi Annan and this kind of thing. And then I began working at the Houston Chronicle. It was kind of funny. Again, it's great talking to Gavin, who's an American who's worked for a lot of British news organizations. Being a Brit who's worked for a lot of American news organizations. But again, I think it's very good to see American media outlets as being a great place to work for, a great place that's kind of our media as well. There's no real barriers there, being a Brit working there. And obviously Houston, being in Texas, right next to Mexico, had a lot of interest. The editor talked about the typical Texan as being Bubba. And he said, if you said a certain thing, say, oh, Bubba likes that, or you'd write the word intelligentsia, and you say, oh, Bubba doesn't like intelligentsia. It's like a bit too kind of beyond Bubba's thing. Then went on to work for Reuters and other organizations full-time, and eventually settled on being a freelance journalist. And I think in terms of doing bigger investigations, or longer reporting on a certain issue, I think freelance are often the best way to do it. I think many people have found that. It's very hard in news organizations often today. They just want constantly feeding the beast, constantly pressures to provide certain stories. So it's very hard to really concentrate on a certain issue. And also a lot of news organizations are very constrained by their security concerns. They say, you cannot go to this area, you cannot go to this town, you can't do this because it's too dangerous. And these security protocols are very good in a way that they don't want on their hands, on their watch, and our journalists to be killed or kidnapped. It's a lot of pressure on them, but also it becomes a straitjacket and very hard to report in those constraints. So anyway, during this time in Mexico, while I was doing this, the Mexican drug war escalated terribly. And when I first arrived there around 2000, 2001, we were seeing about 1,000 deaths every year related to organized crime and drug cartels. And by the time by 2010, we were seeing in a single year 15,000 deaths. In the last 6 years, we've seen more than 65,000 deaths, murders related to this. And this has been while the Mexican federal government launched a military offensive against drug cartels. They sent up to 96,000 soldiers against them, plus 16,000 Marines, 30,000 federal police, which only created more violence and a very bad circle of violence. And we saw within this horrific things comparable to war zones around the world. There was a single massacre of 72 people in one single massacre by a drug cartel. There has been mass graves with more than 200 corpses. There's been firefights lasting 72 hours. So a very strange, low-intensity war, though this has happened while still parts of the country are very normal, as I'm sure many of you have seen. You can still go to Cancun resort and it's fine. Mexico City is still relatively safe with the same murder rate as Boston. And I see this is an extremely important story for many reasons, not just the kind of fascination value, but it's a really important story. It goes in a lot of tangents, and I'll go into some of those afterwards. But just to illustrate a quick point of some of the kind of violence and the kind of thing I'm covering, I'm going to read a very swift excerpt from this book I wrote about Mexican drug cartels. It all seemed like a bad dream. It may have been vivid and raw, but it felt somehow surreal, like Gonzalo was watching these terrible acts from above, like it was someone else who had firefights with masked federal police in broad daylight, someone else who stormed into homes and dragged away men from crying wives and mothers, someone else who duct taped victims to chairs and starved and beat them for days, someone else who clasped a machete and began to hack off their heads while they were still living. But it was all real. He was a different man when he did those things, Gonzalo tells me. He was a man who smoked crack cocaine and drank whiskey every day. A man who enjoyed power in a country where the poor are so powerless. A man with the latest model truck who could pay for houses in cash. A man who had 4 wives and children scattered all over. A man without God. In those days I had no fear. I felt nothing. I had no compassion for anybody, he says, speaking slowly, swallowing some words. His voice is high and nasal after police smashed his teeth out until he confessed. His face betrays little emotion. I can't really take in the gravity of what he is saying until I play back a video of the interview later and transcribe his words. And then as I waller over the things he told me, I have to pause and shudder inside. Gonzalo spent 17 years working as a soldier, kidnapper, and murderer for Mexican drug gangs. In that time, he took the lives of many, many more people than he can count. In most countries, he'd be viewed as a dangerous serial killer and locked up in a top security prison. But in Mexico today, there are thousands of serial assassins. Overwhelmed jails have themselves become scenes of bloody massacres. 20 slain in one riot, 23 in another, 44 in yet another. I talked to Gonzalo in a prison cell he shares with 8 others on a sunny Tuesday morning in Ciudad Juarez, the most dangerous city on the planet with more than 3,000 murders in 2010. He was incarcerated a year before I met him and bought his way into a Christian wing, hoping it was a quiet place where he could escape the war. But when I listened carefully to his interview, he sounds like he really has given his heart to Christ, really does pray for redemption. And when he talks to me, a nosy British journalist prying into his past, he's really confessing to Jesus. You meet Christ and it is a totally different thing, he tells me. You feel horror and start thinking about the things you have done because it was bad. You think about the people. It could have been a brother of mine I was doing these things to. I did bad things to a lot of people. A lot of parents suffered. You learn a lot of forms of torture. To a point you enjoy carrying them out. We laughed at people's pain at the way we tortured them. There are many forms of torture, cutting off arms, decapitating. This is a very strong thing. You decapitate someone and have no feeling, no fear. So yeah, it's quite a strong testimony from Gonzalo in this prison cell. I'm going to show some slides now to look more about the journalistic investigation to arrive at these kind of things. You can talk about the Mexican drug cartel issue in many ways. There's many tangents they can lead, but I want to focus on the actual journalistic experience and the process that is probably most useful to people here. When I first arrived in Mexico, I saw drug cartels as being a bit like a riddle, something which was out there, which was very hard to comprehend, very hard to get your hands on. You saw it in the press and saw these stories, but there was very poor sources. They weren't talking to drug cartel people themselves. It was often the government's point of view and some expert from a university in the United States. So I really wanted to try and get closer and had to really think outside the box of any ways I could try and get closer to drug cartels. And I think this is something we can use in many different types of stories. Whether it's reporting on criminal groups in England or in criminal groups in Europe or in Islamic radical groups or the far right, or even marginal groups like it could be travelers or any kind of groups kind of outside the mainstream of society. I think a lot of people find they have these different ways to try and get close to them. So I'll use some slides to illustrate some of these points. So one of the first things I did was going with the Mexican security forces or US security forces, kind of the first port of call in investigating drug cartels that everyone thinks of straight away. Let's go with the army, go with the police and so forth. And the kind of typical thing you do with the army, a lot of people want to go over there and they say, oh, I want to embed with the army for a month. But realistically, this is not going to happen. The army really show you what they want to show you. So the typical thing they show you is this kind of thing. This is going through a marijuana plantation in Sinaloa state. Now, Sinaloa is a place in Mexico which is to the Mexican drug cartels a bit how Sicily is to the Italian mafia. It's the kind of cradle where many of them are from. And this they're tearing up marijuana. They have it covered in black because the military fly over in helicopters and look for the marijuana. So you can see them there. So you arrive there and you watch the soldiers tear up a marijuana plantation and then they burn it on a bonfire. But anyone who's thinking you do not get high or stoned watching them burn marijuana on a bonfire, what happens is the smoke goes in the sky or the plant's often not mature or so forth. What the soldiers often don't show you, they don't want to take you to a real raid because they don't want you to be killed and they don't want you to really see how they act. Because a lot of Mexican soldiers really are firing left, right and centre. They're killing people left, right and centre. Even a lot of the criminals, they might go in there and they're going to shoot very fast. They're under a lot of fire, they're under a lot of pressure. But even by their own numbers, they killed more than 2,000 criminals in the last 5 years in firefights. So it's a serious situation. Now, sometimes they want to do a bit of a dog and pony show, but they do want to give you a show sometimes. So I had some colleagues of mine filming one of these marijuana burnings, and they heard some gunshots. And they all dived on the floor and had it on film. And they got a decent film. They said, we were under fire at the marijuana plantation. The narcos fired on us. But really, they think that maybe the military fired themselves in the air to give it a better TV show. So you have to be careful sometimes about exactly what's going on, and be very careful about how the army are manipulating that. Like, I think anyone can guess what this is. Does anyone not know what it is? This a kilo of cocaine, of Colombia's finest. These are the typical kilo bricks they have. Everyone calls it a key. And you can see the red markings that here are actually the kind of bow and arrows in red, are actually the marking of the Colombian cartel which produces it. They have their own brand names. I was at one seizure with a military unit, and they had about half a ton, about 500 of these kilo bricks, which is in Mexican terms small. In the UK, when they find that's huge. Recently they found 440 tons at Tilbury Docks, but anyway, in Mexican terms it's a very small kind of standard thing. And there was a general there who was a bit shorter than me, but very, very broad. And he picked up one of these kilo bricks and cut it open with a knife and said to me, "Go on, taste it." And I was looking at him like, is he just joking? Is this a joke? He said, "No, go on, taste it. Go on, lick it." So I didn't really know what to do, but I ended up and licked the cocaine. And he said, "Yeah, there you go. You see, your tongue's gone numb." So that's again some of the things there with the military. Apart from that, I would often go to the American agents. Now, you have the Drug Enforcement Administration, the most important in fighting drug cartels. And they have undercover agents who have infiltrated the cartels. I have in my book a profile of an agent who spent months, years infiltrating cartels and getting close to them and so forth. You can learn, obviously, from these agents extraordinary things. Many people have based all their investigation on criminal gangs on this source. It's basically been their source, the DEA. It works for some people. There are some good, there's some good books that have come out because their investigations can be quite incredible. But I was just very careful. For me, it's only one element in a very complicated story. And later also found that being too close to the DEA can be a bad thing. There was one journalist in Mexico in the 90s, an American journalist, he did many investigations and became an honorary DEA agent, named by DEA. That's a very bad thing. If you want to go and interview a cartel member and you're an honorary DEA agent, it doesn't look very good. So I also have to be very careful about how you mix these kind of sources. Then I started looking at going to the communities. How can I actually go to the places where drugs are produced, where drug traffickers come from? And first I did some quite reckless things of just driving to some quite small villages around the countryside without any sources, and didn't really get too far. Often you bump into a brick wall. Apart from putting yourself in kind of harm's way, you're just not really finding much. So I found you needed links to try and get into these places. First I find through social workers often. They would know these areas, they'd work with gang members, they could introduce you to kids who've been on the lower levels of these organizations. I go to priests. Often the priests could be very friendly and could also know the community and could introduce you to people. And I go to musicians, funnily enough. I used to be involved in music back in London in the early 90s and in some radio and music. So I was very interested in music anyway and found it as a good bridge into places. I first went to Ciudad Juarez and got involved with some rappers in Ciudad Juarez. And through them, got involved with, they knew many people who had been arrested for trafficking over the border. In fact, some of them had themselves been arrested for trafficking over the border, or they had friends who had become assassins. So again, it was a way in. And I also got into this other form of music called narco corridos, or drug ballads, which is believe it or not, a band of musicians. They're posing with their real rifles and guns. They're not fakes, they're real. They posed them for a music video they were making. This was taken by a friend of mine called Marco Garte when they were filming the video. And these bands, which are actually incredibly involved in the drug trafficking world, they sing songs glorifying drug traffickers and play at their parties, but they also actually get paid often to write songs about them. So they're actually very close and know many players. Now here's another one of these corrido bands. This band, their name is Grupo Cartel de Sinaloa, which means the Sinaloa Cartel Group, almost like the musical wing, and it's obviously very associated. Now they're actually posing here by a graveyard, and these buildings are actually graves. They're like mausoleums that the narco traffickers spend like $250,000, $500,000 on, imported Italian marble, air conditioning, and crazy stuff. Kind of weird culture where they have all this money, they get killed in violence, and then build themselves incredible graves. And this band, obviously, they openly said to me, we charge this amount to write songs about gangsters. We've written, and they had all their songs and some quite interesting songs. This photo was actually taken in 2008 when I was up there doing a story, and then later I carried on having some contact with them. They were actually attacked last year, and the singer, who's this guy, actually died in the attack last year. Okay, so then seeing this violence, getting close to this violence, I became more involved with police reporting, crime reporting. So I would go with photographers, Mexican crime reporters who are very good. They call it in Mexico La Nota Roja, the red note. And they have an incredible experience, incredible ability to get to murders very fast, to get to these violent scenes very fast, and to cover these kind of things. Sometimes you get there before the police, which is kind of worrying. Often they're using scanners to tap into police radio, so we're going to hear what they're saying. Sometimes you get phoned up by gangsters themselves saying there's a body in a certain place, and you arrive there. But some real characters. I work often with a guy in north-west Mexico in Sinaloa State who's one of these with a crazy beard and gold chain, and he always jumps in the car and burns all the red lights and arrives there fast, and he's taking photographs even before he's out of the vehicle. But this is a typical scene. It's quite gruesome. It's obviously a very gruesome issue. There's various bodies scattered around. You can see the guy's head's been blown off by AK-47 rounds, which is often what they use. Now, often what the cartels will do is they'll target their victim by blocking them in on the street, and then they'll fire 300 to 500 rounds. So they'll kill all the people, but often they'll kill innocent people around. They'll kill the person selling tacos on the street, the person driving behind, and so they cause a lot of mayhem there. And this is another brutal murder scene. This illustrates, taken by another colleague of mine, a very good Mexican photographer called Fernando Brito, who won third prize in the World Press Photo. You can see here how they decorate the bodies. This is obviously a strange one where they've got this skull, animal skull there. You can see the money, they've kind of tilted around and they kind of crossed there, and this kind of different things. This illustrates part of the kind of propaganda of violence involved with the Mexican drug cartels, that they put decapitated heads on displays, make videos of violence, and it's all part of a kind of war of propaganda and how they use that. And that becomes very difficult as a journalist to know how best to cover that. How can we best deal with it? Should we even release on our news reports a lot of their violence videos? How much are we spreading propaganda for them? How can we deal with that issue? And so that's a very difficult question. After the kind of cop reporting, I started getting into trying to find actual drug traffickers themselves or drug users themselves, people at the lower rungs of these. Does anybody know what drug they're making there? No? Two down? Before crack? Cocaine, yeah, cocaine. This is the early phases of making cocaine. Cocaine, you get the coca leaves from the plant, you cut them up, you mix them with gasoline, and you burn up this stuff, and you get this paste, this coca paste. This eventually goes through another process, which is more complicated, where it becomes the cocaine thing. So this is known as coca paste. And this is in the south of Colombia, in a place called Tupumayo, working with a photographer called Oliver Schmieg, a very good German photographer who's been in Colombia for a lot of years, and I worked a lot with him, and he's helped me very much in sources. And these kind of people are quite easy to get access to, people at the very bottom rungs of this, who are not really involved with the cartels, just grow coca leaves, and cook them up into coca paste, which is not that difficult. And then, I also went through drug rehab centers around the border in Mexico. I thought if people who are addicted to drugs must have contact with drugs and might know drug sellers. And sure enough, hang around with in drug rehab centers, I would find many of these. Also hung around an area in the city of Nuevo Laredo. There was basically an area of prostitution. And there was a guy who was a hustler there who I got to know, a guy called Rolando, who was a crack and heroin addict. He used to like to smoke crack and take heroin straight away afterwards. And he'd also been done for trafficking over the border. And through him, again, a very low-level kind of guy on the scale of these things, but through him, it was a source where I managed to get deeper and understand better this world. And then finally got to the gangsters themselves that, as I described there, the interview with Gonzalo. One thing about this, that was in a prison. Going into prisons, it wasn't as easy as just you go in and ask, can I talk to a drug trafficker? Yeah, here he is. It was a long time of going into prisons, going to many prisons around Mexico. Many wouldn't let you see anybody. Eventually I found in Ciudad Juarez a very open prison director who had a system, in fact, of segregating the prisoners by their cartel affiliation to try and avoid the fighting. And he was very open about me entering. And then I got to know an evangelical church inside the prison. And on repeated visits, got to know prisoners, got to meet them and find out who'd been in the cartel, and then eventually find out who'd been the deepest in and get their stories. So again, a lot of work. And then got to gangsters outside of the prison. This was taken in a safe house of a cell for the Medellin cartel in Medellin, Colombia. Again, with the photographer Oliver Schmid, who had the contacts. Getting to the gangsters outside the prison was the toughest thing of all. It was, again, through long time and contacts, friends of friends, building on all these first sources I'd known, getting to know people and gain trust, and finally to the point where you can actually talk to gang members, cartel members, criminals on the outside. So, about what I'd already learned from this thing. One thing, this here is a picture of a cartel hit squad. I mean, if you can believe it, these are not soldiers, these actually are gangsters. And you can see that it's not a great fight, this is one taken by them and sent to as a propaganda thing. It was put on a website called Blog del Narco, which shows a lot of kind of narco propaganda. And you can see the kind of weaponry they have, the kind of helmets, the kind of material they have. But one thing I learned from covering this was that what you have in Mexico is you have real machines of death, real institutions. How can you explain how there's been 65,000 deaths due to this? And you see from interviewing these people that many of them on the surface, when I'm talking to these drug traffickers and these assassins, they don't appear to be deranged. I can talk to them the same way I can talk to Gavin over there, and have quite a sensible conversation. But these institutions that they've gone through a certain path in life, and for whatever reasons have been recruited off from a very, very young age and been brought up in these machines of death. And it's not as often the governments of Mexico or the United States or so forth ourselves see this as kind of a moral decision of people to become killers. It's often the way they're going through. And when you see these very sophisticated institutions killing machines, you see how it perpetrates a low-intensity war. How often you talk to them, they see themselves as combatants in a war zone, and they even talk about drugs financing the war rather than the war to fight over drugs. It becomes a war for its own sake, a war for territory and so forth. They recruit many former military guys in them, and that's how you can start to explain how you can have a massacre of 72 people. Because you have units running around, and they actually train themselves or have a lot of training themselves on camps. So often when I was seeing this around 2009 and starting to say, this is really going to go very bad. You've got these organizations there, and sure enough, around 2010, 2011, we saw this death count just go absolutely off the roof. It was often an argument I had around the United States with many academics there would say, no, it's just simply a criminal problem like any other. So, well, no, look at these groups. These are as well armed as many guerrilla groups around the world. And this is one of the reasons why Mexico is so important, because the kind of problems we're seeing in Mexico now could happen in many other countries. In the 20th century, we looked a lot at dictatorships, military dictatorships, and guerrillas, insurgents who are communists or nationalists or religious insurgents. But now we can see armed groups with no ideology who are simply fighting for economic interests, who can really challenge the state and really challenge the civilian population. That's one of the reasons why Mexico really does have to be looked at, as well as the links of the drugs and crime, which are also completely international. Now, I'm sure many people are asking, or maybe have asked about the risks and the dangers, and this is a whole thing on high risk reporting. I try to get away a bit from the He-Man foreign correspondent thing. I don't want to dwell on it too much. I think a lot of the TV reporting, especially, starts to really focus on the foreign correspondent in these kind of issues as being this kind of He-Man, and that becomes the whole narrative. And I think that loses and belittles the issue. It's an issue we should all look at. It's not a tabloid issue of a He-Man going to a difficult place and that being the story. It's a very important international story that's happening here. But looking at some of the kind of issues that people can encounter in these, I mean, first obviously there's a lot of firefights and shooting. It's not all the time within Mexico. This is often sporadic and happening in different parts of the country. But when you're really looking for it, like I have been, I have been in situations where there've been firefights and shooting around me, and there's obviously hostile environment courses coping with that. I think one thing, and again, Gavin probably knows this well from covering Nicaragua in the 80s, and many other people here who have been in armed conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan now, or Libya. I think one of the biggest problems for journalists is the feeling of invincibility, the complex of invincibility. You start to do this and you think, oh wow, I can do it, it's not so bad. And then you feel that nothing can touch you. And that when there's a firefight going on, you're somehow not there, you're watching it. And especially I feel cameramen suffer from this because they feel like they're watching it on TV. There was one Mexican journalist who was filming a shootout in 2006 and was shot and died. And he carried on filming and filmed his own death, effectively. And again, because I think it's that feeling of just being there watching this. And I've been with a camera person, there was shooting happening. I was saying, we have to go, we have to run. And they're just sitting there kind of, take their time. Another thing is that covering cartels, and again, this is probably true covering many guerrilla groups and people around the world, you get spied on all the time. Now, Mexican cartels have a big network of spies that they call halcones or hawks. And it can be a 13-year-old kid on the street, or a guy in a wheelchair, or a person selling chewing gum, or anybody who's there could be a spy for the cartel, potentially. And it really came home. I knew about this, that they call up and phone in, but it really came home to me one time. I was riding with the police in the city of Monterrey, in quite a difficult neighborhood controlled by the Zetas cartel, and the police tuned in to their communication. We heard their radio contact, and we heard them talking about us. So it was kind of, we were spying on them, spying on us. And so, you see it's really there. It would be, quite interesting. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be it's an interesting idea. The other thing is that they can actually tap into your cell phones. It's actually very easy to listen to cell phones, as many people know. The army showed me one piece of equipment which looks a bit like a laptop with some antennas which can actually listen in to cell phone communication. And another time, the Zetas kidnapped some engineers from a cell phone company, and they actually were starting to gain more technology to tap into cell phones. So again, your cell phone is really not very safe there. A lot of the time there's very difficult moments in the field, very complicated moments, and there's many different moments in reporting on this, where people can suddenly get aggressive. Drug traffickers or members of security forces can suddenly get aggressive and threatening and make threats and so forth. And one thing to remember, often it's not your fault. Sometimes it can be the people you bring with, especially when you're working with like British TV crews or American TV crews who can fly in and push you and try and push further and get you in a very, very difficult situation. And one time, for example, we were filming an execution of 5 people. The person's father was there, of one of the people who had died, very, very distraught, and the film crew was straight in his face with a camera. and this is the father of an alleged drug trafficker. His other son was there getting very angry, very, very angry. They didn't understand the Spanish. And they were putting the camera in his face and again, disrespectful, also really pushing and creating a very difficult situation. But other times, you be careful that you're not the one getting somebody else in problems. Often, if I go to other places around Mexico, further from Mexico City, and work with local journalists, and a lot of local journalists are fantastic, really great in Mexico, then I'll be careful that I'm not getting them in trouble. And there's been, over the last 10 years, by some counts, 125 Mexican journalists have been murdered. I know one colleague I work with was among them. Other colleagues I've had have fled the country outside of Mexico or gone to the United States. Others have come to Mexico City like myself. Mexico City is in some ways a buffer against this kind of violence. So in Mexico City is one of the reasons why we can do this. Like many Mexican journalists doing it, you can live in Mexico City and go to other parts of the country and still carry out this type of violence. I'm sure some of you are wondering, why on earth anyone would want to do this, want to kind of carry on covering this level of violence. But I think it's good to remember, how important this is, but also that really what you go to the journalists is nothing compared to many, many of the families who suffer with this kind of violence. And like any war that happens, it claims many civilian victims. And there's many horrific stories I have and have seen. Just one, for an example, one human story of a civilian family who suffered. There was a family in Monterrey of school teachers. Both the husband and wife were school teachers with two sons, 18 and 15 years old. They're in their home, and about 1 a.m, an armed group who looked kind of like this kicked down the door and stormed in their house. And suddenly they were all put on the floor. They just started stealing things. Again, when you have armed groups doing this, they're not just content to fight their rivals. They also think, let's get some money from that house over there or that family over there. So they started stealing their things, and then they said to the mother, "Who's the oldest kid?" And the elder kid put his hand up. He was 18 years old. He was a philosophy student in his first year of philosophy university. They said, "You're coming with us." They took him away from the house. Disappeared. A day later, they called up and asked for a ransom payment. Said, give us 20 some figure, tens of thousands of dollars, or you'll never see your son. So the family, again, a poor family of school teachers, or just about middle-class family of school teachers, and got money together and paid up the money, and nothing else was heard. They never heard from their son again. They still now, today, this happened in 2011, they're still looking. And when you look into the faces of this mother and the distraught, how this has devastated their life completely, you really understand the seriousness of this issue. Another mother I was interviewing in Sinaloa State, her son, 21 years old, was killed in a shootout. And his name was Juan Carlos, and she again was devastated. She had these enormous photos and was really, I found it hard to talk. We filmed her by his grave and so forth. And again, it's hard to describe or think about that pain, what that does to a person. And she had a young baby with her, a very, very small baby, about 3 months old. And as I was leaving, I said, "What's the name of the baby?" And she said, "The name of the baby was Juan Carlos, exactly the same as the son who had died." So she, in a way, saw that after her son had died, after the world had failed him, society had failed him, he died in a shootout as an innocent victim, she tried to have a new son to replace him with the same name, to kind of find his way, and hoped that in 20 years' time, when he was 21, he wouldn't face this same thing. And I think that's a good thing. We all have to try and look to see if the world in 20 years is not as bad as the world we're seeing now. Yeah.
Good. We can open for questions. Anybody have anything?
What's the relationship between the cartels and the street gangs in places like Guatemala, such as Marisol and Trujillo?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very important question. The Mexican cartels have been using for some years street gangs as muscle for them. The cartels are really federations with both multi-billion-dollar organizations with cells all over, and they use street gangs, young poor kids often, and pay them small amounts of money to be muscle. Now they've done this in Mexico, they've done it in Guatemala with the maras and so forth. This creates all kind of destruction because suddenly the cartel war gets brought down to a street level. So suddenly you get rival street gangs being backed by cartels and all kinds of violence. Now the maras are a bit more sophisticated than even the average street gang. I mean, the maras, if anyone doesn't know, they began in the 80s in the United States by many immigrants from Central America. They were deported and became very big there themselves, got very high-powered weaponry. And some of the Mara leaders now are pretty powerful, sophisticated people getting to more levels of crime. And there's definitely, you can see the relationship with Mexican cartels in all kinds of ways. I've interviewed Mara people. I interviewed one Mara guy, a young guy who was 18 years old. He'd been arrested with C4 explosives. He was a pretty scary guy for 18 years old. He had a pretty bad stare for an 18-year-old. And again, he was talking about how friends of his been recruited into the Zetas, how they had all this relationship they had with cartels.
Over here, right over here.
Why do people involved in the drug trade want to talk to you?
Yes, it's a good question. I think there's different reasons. I mean, one reason I think all as journalists doing this kind of work is we have to remember that human beings are sociable animals, naturally. And often the way that, say you might be working, often they will talk, they want to talk about stuff. Even though really it's not often in the best interest to talk. Often you might be working on a story and you go to the pub and have a couple of beers and you start telling about the story, even though you don't really want to share the story, but you just like to tell or talk. When you've often talked to assassins, and especially when they start talking, they've got a lot of pain inside. I don't be too forgiving of people who've carried out these crimes, but they do have a lot of pain inside that when they start to really, often they haven't really told these stories. Like, and the way I approach the interviews, you don't sit there and go, how many people have you killed? Who do you work for? They always begin with easy questions and kind of gradually get into this and talk about their life story and explain. Sometimes you get people, generally older people, who say, look, and you just explain, look, I'm just a journalist, I want to make sense of this. I'm documenting this violence. Your experience is useful to help other young people not get into this. And there are people who say, who have thought about this. There are people there. I've met people who want to get out. There was one guy we met who was in his late 30s. He wanted to get out. He'd been involved in this for years, and there's no mechanism or way out of this. He's trapped. So there's many things there. Sometimes with the cartels themselves have put out their own propaganda, and sometimes want to try and talk to try and get things through, almost speaking like kind of public relations or speaking like they're sending out their own message. But again, you have to be careful about that. You don't want to become a tool of cartels, spreading the message for them or giving out some signal that they want.
I'll ask you a question if I may.
Yeah, sure.
What's the? I'll get to you just in a second. But what's the connection between the DEA and the structure and finances of the cartels? Because you think with all the vast resources of the United States, huge numbers of people, weaponry of all kinds, intelligence apparatuses, they're totally unsuccessful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this gets to the issue of like the war on drugs, which is very important. And I mean, the real problem is the war on drugs doesn't work. You can arrest a drug trafficker and someone will take his place. As long as Americans are buying drugs, as long as Brits are buying drugs, and everyone else, then people are going to sell drugs and traffic them, and the value is inflated. The DEA, I look a lot in the book over the history of the war on drugs as well, parallel to this, and you can see actually started all the way back in the early 20th century, when Washington first made opium illegal in 1914 in the House and Narcotics Tax Act. Mexicans started trafficking opium to the United States. So it's almost 100 years now it's been going on. And when Richard Nixon, launched the war on drugs, kind of escalated things, and drug use escalated, and it carried on. The DA now get involved in some pretty interesting espionage, as well as the ATF and Homeland Security. Got a new thing called ICE as well, and the CIA. And the CIA are in Mexico. They got attacked in Mexico last year, and they do things like actually trafficking drugs to arrest the traffickers. They actually set up front companies. So they say, we'll move your cocaine for you. and they move it and bust it, and they're like, or they, the ATF did this sting which they actually watched thousands of weapons be sold in the United States and go to Mexico, and then they lost sight of them, and that created a big sting called up to Washington. They work with confidential informants who are active killers and pay them for information. So again, they get into all kinds of espionage they get into to try and make this bigger bust, but it still can't really turn the fundamental question.
If you were the drug czar, what would be your strategy? And what is the solution, I guess?
Well, the drug czar in the United States, under the rules of the drug czar, you have to be against legalization of drugs. So I'd find it very hard to be the drug czar. I think three main areas need to focus on to be a solution. One, I'm totally believe in drug policy reform. I think we first need to begin legalizing marijuana and taking that outside, and then look at other drugs and look at ways. I think it's estimated that about $30 billion goes every year to these people. So in 10 years, that's $300 billion. In 30 years, you're talking close to $1 trillion. That's why you're creating hit squads. That's why you're driving a war. Do we want in 10 more years, 20 more years, to give these guys another $300, $600 billion? Or should that money, if people are going to take drugs anyway, should that money go into small businesses, whatever? But you can't blame it completely on drug policy. I think also you have to, in Mexico and in many parts of the world, build justice systems which work. I mean, Juarez in 2010, I mentioned earlier, there was more than 3,000 murders in 2010. Only about 5% of them were solved. And of those, you don't really know if they got the right people or got somebody in this life, still have a job. They suddenly find a guy and say, we'll do you for 300 murders. But will they really the murderer? So you really need a justice system that works. And also you need to find solutions to marginalization. Now again, I say Mexican issue is important in so many ways. We're seeing in Europe increased marginalization in many communities. In the UK, in Spain and so forth. And obviously we're a million miles away still from this, but then again, some of the fundamentals are there. I've talked to these kids in Ciudad Juarez and they were carrying out murders for up to $85 or like £50 for a murder. They were killing somebody for £50. So you've got to see a real social degradation which allows them to do that. And you have to really worry about marginalization all around the world. It's a real issue, the way the world is going, of divided communities and of wealth in certain places and vast pockets of poverty and people outside the system.
No, right.
Thank you, Ioan, for your account. I'm Italian, and I see many similarities with the situation, not so much of mafia, but more of Camorra. In fact, it's really a war on drugs, which is developing in these years. And one of the similarities that I find between the Italian and the Mexican situation, within some of other journalist accounts, is also the role of politics. Local politicians and national politicians were strongly involved in backing up some of the cartels, not only in fighting them. Did you actually have the chance to talk to some of the politicians and what's kind of what is there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Mexico's massively corrupt. Okay, in terms of institutions, apart from politicians being very corrupt, okay, first the police force are incredibly corrupt. This guy interviewed, who I didn't mention in this excerpt of the guy who was chopping people's heads off. If any of you can guess what his first job was, a policeman. He began as a policeman. He said he learned to torture and kill in the police, and then he went, left the police and got more money with the assassins. Now, in many ways, there's so many of these guys have been policemen, and in many ways, the police force are, or really, you get like a criminal police complex. In terms of politicians, there's many politicians. Like always, it's very hard to prove. There was one guy who was a federal deputy from Michoacan state, and there was a tapped phone call of him talking to a drug capo, a famous drug capo. When it happened, he'd been accused before, but when it happened, he fled and went into hiding. He's still in hiding now. I went to Michoacan state and we ran into one of his advisors, and he had a copy of my book. He asked me to sign a copy of his book. one of his advisors. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, there are many. There's been the governors there's one governor who's in prison. Governor of Quintana Roo State is in prison for being involved with drug traffickers and money laundering.
Over there.
With all this billions of dollars floating around the system, you're aware that HSBC money laundered about 700 billion, was it, or 700?
No, it's about 7 billion. What it was yeah.
But the chairman of that bank is in the British government.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, the HSBC case was about 7 billion they had. It wasn't 7 billion they proved was from drug cartels. It was 7 billion which they didn't have proof of all that source of that money. But yeah, certainly major banks move drug money. It's a big issue. There's all this money. They've got very sophisticated money laundering schemes. Money goes to China, money goes to the US, money goes to Dubai, to Panama, and all over the place. Within Mexico, they have front businesses used, in all kinds of ways. It's a major problem. It's something we should definitely look at. Sometimes it's outrageous when you see really horrific antisocial crimes, and you think they could trace this money very easily. There was time when they did a mass kidnapping of migrants, and they were getting payments from the families by Western Union, and somebody was going and collecting 20 Western Union payments at the same time because they were migrant families, and they really could have traced this or stopped this. So they definitely should clamp down way more. However, some people kind of argue that if only they went after money, this problem would stop. However, I kind of believe that money is like water and it finds the path of least resistance, and they're going to find ways to move this money. As long as the drug market's there, they'll find ways to launder it. But yeah, we should still clamp down a bit more. And yeah, certainly worrying about the being in the British government.
Okay, down here? Yeah. Hold it, wait for Mike, it's just coming, yeah.
I mean, I actually help cover these things for a TV company, I won't mention the name. And one of the things that sticks in my mind is it's very difficult to get quality footage out of Mexico. I can give you the standard thing, there's a general chatting, there's a couple of lonely looking ethnic guys that look like they've been beaten up, and some drugs and some very bad guns. And the quality footage doesn't seem to be there. If I had a similar story from Iraq, there would be street scenes shot, there would be interviews, there would be all kinds of things. Is it hard for you guys to sell this stuff to agencies?
Well, in terms of the footage, yeah, it's a good point what you say. A lot of people, Mexico again is very interesting to look at because you're seeing a type of low intensity armed conflict, very atypical and different from what we understand. And I think this is important because this can happen in many countries, I think will happen in many countries in this century. When people go to Iraq or Afghanistan, they normally embed with the military. So they go with the military when they go in missions, and there's quite defined areas where a lot of the conflict is. In Mexico, you find that first, the Mexican military will not let anybody embed with them. And then the violence can happen many places around the country. So the footage of shootouts, there are footage of shootouts, is rarer. I have used footage of shootouts in video packages I've made, but it's much rarer to really be there when the fire is going on. Now, sometimes I got one video which was given to me by somebody linked to drug cartels, and it's a video they'd taken of a shootout, or rather a drive-by shooting. And they'd taken it with a cell phone, but it was pretty brutal stuff. I mean, they went in there, it was like brrr. And I had a big ethical question, should I use this footage or not? Should I allow a drug cartel person to be your photographer in this sense? But in there, I didn't use it in the end, more because I thought maybe you could see the guy's face. They had one shot of a guy firing an AK-47 like that against his shoulder, and you could you see his face? Maybe, maybe not. It was kind of blurred. But then what if he didn't? Then what if he got killed afterwards because the other people saw it? And then what are they going to do to you? So again, a lot of difficult things there. But I think there has been a lot. I mean, between 2010 and 2011, there was a lot of TV programs on this issue. And then Syria took off and various things took off.
Yeah, right back there.
was wondering, does the Mexican government do anything to prevent teenagers getting into those gangs? And in general, in Latin America, how is this violence embedded into their popular culture?
Yeah, good questions. First, I think the prevention scheme is very important. I've been around Latin America looking at different prevention schemes. There's some brilliant social workers in Ciudad Juarez, in Ecuador, in Guatemala. You find some great social workers who really, and I really believe it can make a difference. I don't think it's kind of pie in the sky stuff. I think really, going to these. I find I can talk to these teenagers, and they want to talk to you. They say no one comes to us. We're in this neighborhood and the government doesn't exist. We're in a neighborhood and the only person who comes to us and says, do you want a job? Are the cartels. And the cartels arrive and they say, you want a cell phone? Oh yeah, great. Do you want a gun? Oh yeah, great. I'm going to give you $50 a week. Stand on this corner. And that's how easily they recruit them because of a real failure of the state. Now, there's some great programs in Juarez. They started to take it seriously and I've always been pushing to take it seriously. I did some work with the International Crisis Group. We did a report on this, and again, I was pushing for prevention schemes, as some other people have been. And the government, this new government who came in December, said they're going to have this national program of prevention and take it seriously. We'll have to really wait and see if that happens. They made the initial thing. They appointed somebody, but we'll see how long it happens. In terms of embedded in popular culture. Within Mexico, they have a strange culture of death. A lot of people see that and they see the kind of Day of the Dead and they see they have a saint death. Personally, I think these cultural elements affect more how the violence is expressed. If you look at, certain cultures might be more likely for suicide bombers, certain cultures might be more likely for kamikazes, certain cultures might be more likely for decapitation. But I don't think they're a driving force of the violence. I think any culture in the world is capable of violence. I mean, if we look at the violence in Europe historically, it's immense. As recently as the Second World War, when you put a bunch of British guys or American guys in a war zone, as Cy Hirsch says, they can commit some crazy stuff. So I think it's more the economic factors, the political factors that place people in these positions, basically in a war zone.
What would these people do if there wasn't the drug companies, the cartels? What would they actually do for income? The lads who were actually chopping up coca leaves, what would be their occupation and who would pay for their families if they weren't doing this?
Yeah, again, a very, very good question, very simple question. I got asked the same thing in Mexico. I was doing a presentation in Mexico and a guy put his hand up and he said, I know a lot of the guys, I know a lot of the Sinaloa cartel guys, and a lot of them, they're good people. they grow drugs. What would they do if it gets legalized? It's a tough question. I think one thing is, I believe if marijuana was legalized, then a lot of these communities who have been in Mexico have been growing marijuana for a century or 50 years could grow it as a legal business. The former president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, said that if marijuana is legalized, he'll open a marijuana company. Now, he's become a real advocate of this. And you can see it like the tequila industry. If Mexico's got a country historically growing marijuana, do that. If in the future cocaine was legalized, and Colombia's historically got an issue with cocaine, could he move that niche? But it's a very good question right now. In Colombia, they've tried projects to get Colombian farmers to stop growing coca and to say, we'll give you some money to grow something else. And then it normally causes problems. They change over and then they get attacked by the guerrillas who make them grow cocaine, and it's generally been very, very difficult. But yeah, it's a very good question. I think you've got to find an economic base for these people. You've got to put input. If you have, again, it comes back to this issue of economics. If you have people outside the system with no jobs, no hope and no future, they'll do whatever it takes.
I'd like to ask you one.
Yeah.
Is there, in your experience of 12 years there, any section of the Mexican government that's clean? Sorry.
Oh, that one.
Okay. The question was, after 12 years studying this conflict, did you discover any section of the Mexican government that's clean?
The American government as well applies to both. Or the British government. It's a very weird thing, corruption. I find it very hard to understand. especially when I get there, you often do these interviews with these soldiers or policemen, and you look at them, and it's like, the guy seems okay, he seems honest. Is he corrupt? I'm trying to get inside his head, like anything, you're trying to get inside their head, behind their eyes. And then suddenly you find these people are arrested on drug trafficking charges. There was one case of a guy that was very familiar to many journalists in Michoacan State, a police commander, and he was always like very friendly with the press and kind of joking, giving information and stuff. And then he was suddenly arrested and put on TV confessing. They have these confession videos. They make him confess on TV. And he described, he was known as El Tyson, like Mike Tyson. He was very, very well built. And he was describing how he like chopped arms off, and he was like actually a real kind of like leading figure in the organised crime cells. And he was actually taking young people and training them how to cut arms off. So again, very difficult. I find it very hard to trust any government officials. There was a guy called, a attorney general called, or a prosecutor for organised crime called Jose Santiago Vasconcelos, who was very popular with journalists, seemed to be very honest, even though it's hard to know if he had a career in law enforcement, and he died in a mysterious plane crash. So yeah, a couple of years ago.
But in terms of the people who run the government, I'm thinking of a lot of illustrious figures like Carlos Slim.
Yeah.
How could they remain separate from an economy of this power in a third world country?
Well, yeah, it's true. There's a lot of you, again, following the money, you get into all kinds of links with business and people complicit. I mean, one thing is that Mexico is a $1 trillion economy. So 30 billion is like 3%, but it's not, it's not 50% or anything. There's still, Mexico is a country with 14 billionaires. Again, with all this poverty, that's probably part of the problem. Carlos Slim himself, the richest man in the world. I don't have any evidence or want to make any accusations against him, but yeah, he's certainly benefited from lots of phone calls, and he basically he owns phone companies and cell phone companies. So he's yeah.
Right down here.
Hi, your story about the school teachers reminded me of the arrest of the lady leader of the school teachers union.
Yeah.
Any comments how deeply embedded would their union be with the cartels?
Well, actually, the school teacher union, Elba Esther Gordillo, who was the head of the school teachers union, was arrested earlier this year. She was known as a very corrupt, aggressive figure who, she's accused of killing people, of ordering murders. And she basically had a very powerful control over a teachers' trade union, of protecting certain privileges and making a lot of money. I've got no evidence of them being directly involved in drug cartels. What I will say is this is kind of characteristic of a culture. Kind of, you see reflections where you have a culture of violence settling political scores. When you have paid assassins around, when you have a country with paid assassins and you're a politician and you want to kill somebody, there's already a pool of paid assassins. Or a history of paid assassins have been more with politicians and have now gone out of their control. So I think, definitely it's very, very kind of mixed up with the political situation. But again, I wouldn't have access of her directly being kind of sitting down with drug traffickers.
Any last questions? One right up in the top, yeah.
With all the grim stuff that you deal with all the time, how do you stay sane? What do you do to stop yourself taking it all home with you?
Well, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, in the early days when I was doing this stuff, and while I was doing it, I kind of thought I felt pretty immune. Again, it's part of that. I think it's the kind of invincibility complex you get as a journalist sometimes. Part of it's the adrenaline in the moment. I hadn't seen a dead body. The closest I got to seeing a dead body growing up was when I worked at Brighton General as a student and carried a patient who died downstairs. I never saw it. We carried it under a blanket. That's the closest I'd seen a dead body in the UK. And arrived in Mexico and started covering this. And the first time I saw a policeman who had his head blown off, and I was sitting there staring, and it was kind of, didn't really look real in a way. You kind of stare at the corpse, and you kind of like, it kind of looks almost like rubber or something. You start to see family members, you see them cry, and see the pain on their face, and it starts to make sense. And then I covered more, and got to scenes with decapitated heads, got to multiple murders, got to a prison where there'd been more than 300 prisoners died in Honduras. Went to a scene with 49 bodies who'd been decapitated and had their hands and legs cut off in Monterrey, which is the place where you could still smell the smell of the stench of that. And I think you realise over time that all this stuff is affecting you psychologically. I think it's something to bear in mind that you are taking this in. I think anybody who's been in situations of violence and conflict has had dreams about that stuff. The intensity of it. And I think a lot of people drink too much alcohol who cover this kind of stuff. One of the colleagues, Mexican journalist who's very experienced covering this, the first time I met him, I arranged to meet him in a certain cantina. And I arrived and he was sitting there by himself at a table with a glass and a bottle of whiskey, just like drinking by himself. So I think that as you're talking about the stories of Chicago, but I mean seriously, I think it's important to take this stuff seriously. And you have to try and understand and try and be in touch with a lot of things, and you realise that it does, you can go around covering stuff and then come home when you're stressed out or a bit in bad moods and stuff, and you've got to take it very seriously. You've seen a lot of difficult things. A lot of journalists or a lot of people around the world have seen very difficult things, and you have to take that in and be aware of that and not let it really kind of drag you down.
I think we've probably run out of time, and I want to thank you very much for that, Ioan Grillo.